Dusty Dreams in Harmony Creek. Harmony Creek was a place where time moved slower, measured by the creak of the old water tower and the rhythmic chirping of crickets at dusk. Dust devils danced in the midday sun, swirling across Main Street and into the open bay door of Alex Tanner's garage, Tanner's Tinkering. The air inside smelled of oil, gasoline, and the faint, metallic tang of welding. Tools hung neatly on the wall, each in its designated spot, a testament to Alex's meticulous nature. Sunlight streamed through the grime-coated windows, illuminating the dust motes suspended in the air like tiny, glittering stars. A half-disassembled tractor engine lay before Alex, its greasy components spread across a worn workbench. "All right, Betsy," Alex muttered to the engine, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Let's see what's ailing ya." He ran a calloused hand over the worn crankshaft, his touch surprisingly gentle. After a few minutes of careful examination, a slow smile spread across his face. "Aha! There it is." He pointed to a hairline fracture invisible to the untrained eye. "Just as I suspected." Old Man Hemlock, the owner of Betsy and half the surrounding farmland, watched from a rickety chair perched near the door. His overalls were faded, his face etched with the lines of a life lived under the relentless sun. "Think you can fix her, Alex?" he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Fix her?" "Mr. Hemlock, I'll have Betsy purring like a kitten by supper time," Alex replied with a grin, already reaching for his welding torch. "Just gotta coax her back to life." And coax her he did. Hours later, the tractor engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, filling the garage with a satisfying rumble. Mr. Hemlock beamed, his eyes twinkling. "You're a miracle worker, Alex. Don't know what this town would do without you." He paid Alex in cash, a handful of crumpled bills that Alex carefully counted. It was enough to cover the parts and a little extra. Not enough for the new diagnostic scanner he'd been eyeing, though. As Mr. Hemlock drove off, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, Alex leaned against the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. He surveyed his domain, the cramped space, the outdated tools, the chipped concrete floor. He imagined a larger garage, bathed in bright fluorescent light, equipped with a state-of-the-art lift and every tool a mechanic could dream of. He pictured himself not just fixing tractors and rusty pickup trucks, but working on high-performance engines, maybe even designing his own. It was a dusty dream, born in a dusty town, but it was his. He picked up a worn catalog from a shelf, flipping through pages filled with gleaming machinery. He lingered on an image of a dynamometer, its digital display a promise of precision and power. He sighed, closing the catalog. One day he'd have more than just dreams. He'd have the tools to make them real. For now, there was the satisfaction of a job well done, the grateful smile of a neighbor, and the comforting rumble of a resurrected engine echoing in his ears. That, he thought, was enough. Almost. A jet out of the blue. The scream of turbines ripped through the afternoon quiet like a runaway chainsaw. Birds scattered from the ancient oak that guarded the Harmony Creek airfield, their panicked chirps barely audible above the roar. A sleek, silver jet, impossibly large for the tiny runway, was descending, its landing gear protesting with a metallic groan. Mayor Bob "Bobcat" Johnson, halfway through a ham and cheese sandwich at his desk in the town hall, nearly choked. He sprinted outside, crumbs flying, just in time to see the jet thump onto the asphalt, nose dipping precariously before righting itself. Smoke, acrid and black, billowed from one engine. "Holy moly!" Bobcat exclaimed, his eyes wide as saucers. He envisioned headlines, Harmony Creek, unexpected haven for high-flying drama. This was it, the break Harmony Creek needed. Tourists, money, maybe even a Starbucks. He puffed out his chest, smoothing down his tie, the one with the bobcats playing poker. This was his moment. As the jet taxied to a halt, the single door unfolding with a hydraulic hiss, Bobcat rushed forward, a grin plastered on his face. "Welcome to Harmony Creek," he boomed, almost tripping over a loose paving stone. "Home of the friendliest folks and the best darn. Well, we have a pie-eating contest every summer." The airfield manager, a wiry man named Earl, trotted up, his face a mask of concern. "Mayor, stand back. We don't know what's going on." Bobcat waved him off dismissively. "Earl, relax. Think of the possibilities. This could put us on the map. Imagine, visit Harmony Creek, where luxury jets make emergency landings." He pictured postcards with the jet superimposed against the backdrop of the town's water tower. A woman emerged from the jet, her face pale, followed by a burly man in a suit. Bobcat adjusted his tie again. Opportunity was knocking. "Everything all right, folks? Need anything at all? We got, a whole lotta atmosphere." Earl was already on his radio, his voice tight with urgency. "This is Earl at Harmony Creek. We've got a disabled jet. Need a mechanic stat. Anyone in a 50-mile radius who can handle a Pratt & Whitney engine, please respond." He paused, listening. "Yeah, I know, it's Harmony Creek." "No, I'm not kidding." Bobcat, oblivious to Earl's frantic calls, was already formulating a welcoming committee. He'd get Millie from the bakery to whip up a batch of her famous apple pies. He'd dust off the town's historical society display, maybe add a section on unexpected aviation events. This was going to be huge. The only mechanic in town. The phone rang, its shrillness slicing through the quiet hum of Alex's workshop. Grease-stained hands stilled, he wiped them on his already filthy overalls before answering. "Tanner's garage," he said, his voice rough. A sigh, heavy with resignation, came through the receiver. "Tanner, this is Dale from the airfield. Look, I know you usually work on tractors and the like, but we're in a bind. A jet's stuck here, engine trouble. The owner is making a fuss. You're the only mechanic for miles. Can you at least take a look?" Alex's heart skipped a beat. A jet? Dell calling him? This was way beyond Betsy the tractor and Mrs. Henderson's sputtering lawnmower. Still, the thrill of the challenge, the potential for something more, was too strong to ignore. "Yeah, Dale, I'll come. Give me an hour." He hung up, a nervous energy thrumming through him. He rinsed his hands, but the grime seemed permanently etched under his fingernails. His garage, usually a source of pride, suddenly felt small and inadequate. Cluttered with wrenches, spare parts, and the lingering scent of motor oil, it was a far cry from the sterile environment he imagined surrounded jet engines. An hour later, Alex stood at the edge of the airfield, the setting sun glinting off the sleek, silver body of the private jet. It dwarfed everything around it, a monument to wealth and technology that felt alien to his world. The sheer scale of the thing was intimidating. He walked around it slowly, absorbing the details, the precise lines of the fuselage, the powerful curves of the wings. This wasn't some clunky farm implement, this was a machine built for speed and precision. Dale, looking harried, met him at the foot of the jet's engine. "All right, Tanner, here's the deal. It's a Pratt & Whitney PW306. Seems like a fuel delivery issue. Won't start. The owner's got a team coming from the city tomorrow, but if you can get it going before then." He trailed off, letting the unspoken promise of a generous bonus hang in the air. Alex nodded, trying to project an air of confidence he didn't feel. He pulled out his flashlight, the beam dancing across the intricate network of pipes and wires. The engine was a labyrinth of unfamiliar components, each one hinting at a level of engineering he'd only dreamt of. He started with the fuel pump, carefully tracing the lines, feeling for leaks, listening for any unusual sounds. He ran a hand along the cold metal, his fingers instinctively searching for clues. Excitement warred with apprehension. This was it. His chance to prove himself, to escape the confines of his small-town existence. But one wrong move, one misdiagnosis, and he could be in serious trouble. He took a deep breath, the scent of jet fuel filling his lungs. Time to get to work. The runaway bride. Clara watched Alex's focused silhouette against the backdrop of the Alaskan twilight filtering through the jet's window. Grease streaked his cheek, a smudge of something that looked suspiciously like hope, and he was completely oblivious to the chaos he'd unwittingly become a part of. She tugged the too large baseball cap lower, shielding her face. These borrowed clothes, jeans, a faded sweatshirt Ava had liberated from some college lost and found, felt like a costume, a shield against the life she was supposed to be living. She'd imagined her wedding 1,000 times. In none of those iterations did it involve fleeing in a hastily repaired private jet, smelling vaguely of aviation fuel and desperation. She'd pictured wildflowers, not the sterile metal of a cabin. A small gathering of friends, not the gnawing anxiety of knowing her family was likely already mobilizing a small army to find her. "He seems competent," she said, the words barely audible above the low hum of the engines Alex had coaxed back to life. Ava, seated across from her, didn't look up from her tablet. Her fingers danced across the screen, probably rerouting flight plans and scrubbing Clara's digital footprint. "He got us off the ground, didn't he? And without asking too many questions. That's more than I can say for half the pilots on our payroll." Clara laced her fingers together, knuckles white. I wanted a normal wedding. A dress I picked myself, not one dictated by a stylist. Vows I wrote, not ones crafted by a publicist." Ava finally glanced up, her expression softening slightly. "You'll have that, Clara. Soon. Just a little further to go." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "I've already flagged a few news sites reporting sightings of a distraught socialite near Anchorage. Nothing concrete yet, but we need to stay ahead of it." She tapped the tablet again. I've also alerted the security detail at your destination. They're aware of the situation and prepared for any unwelcome guests. The unwelcome guests were, of course, her family. Clara shuddered. Thank you, Ava. I don't know what I'd do without you. Ava offered a rare, almost imperceptible smile. Probably be stuck marrying a man you despise, surrounded by people who only care about your last name. Now try to get some rest. We still have a few hours left, and I suspect things will get interesting once we land. Clara leaned back against the worn leather seat, closing her eyes. Interesting was an understatement. This entire escapade was a carefully constructed house of cards built on secrets and desperate hope, and a very, very large sum of money. She just prayed it wouldn't all come crashing down before she reached the altar, or, rather, the little chapel overlooking the Pacific that she dreamed about for years. Tractor parts to the rescue. Alex wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, the humid summer air clinging to him like a second skin. The turbine lay open, its intricate workings exposed like the inner workings of a finely crafted clock. Except this clock could fly. And potentially explode. He pointed a stubby finger at a component nestled deep within the engine's belly. That's the problem, Mr. Hemmings. See that fuel regulator? It's cracked clean through. No fuel, no start. Hemmings, the airfield manager, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles earned from years battling wind and bureaucracy, sighed. Can you get a replacement? Alex chewed on his lip. Ordering one would take weeks, maybe months. And frankly, finding a regulator for this particular engine? Good luck. It's older than I am. He paused, a glimmer of an idea sparking in his eyes. But I might have a workaround. He disappeared into the organized chaos of his workshop, a place where tools hung like trophies and the air hummed with the ghosts of engines past. Clara van der Linde, drawn by the mechanical symphony, watched from the doorway of the hangar, Ava a silent sentinel at her side. Alex emerged, grimy and grinning, clutching a handful of greasy metal parts. Tractor parts to the rescue, he announced, holding up a gleaming brass fitting. It's a long shot, but the fuel regulator on my old Massey Ferguson is almost the same size and thread pattern. I can adapt it. Hemmings raised a skeptical eyebrow. You're going to use tractor parts on a jet engine? Desperate times, Mr. Hemmings, Alex said. His voice laced with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. It'll be a temporary fix, just enough to get her running until we can source a proper replacement. He meticulously explained his plan, detailing the modifications he would make, his hands moving with practiced ease. Hemmings, slowly won over by Alex's conviction and the dwindling alternatives, nodded his assent. Clara, who had been eavesdropping from the edge of the hangar, turned to Ava, her brow furrowed. Tractor parts? On a jet engine? Is that even safe? Ava remained impassive, her gaze fixed on Alex as he began to tinker with the engine. Safe is a relative term, Ms. van der Linde. But Mr. Tanner seems to know what he's doing. Still, it's unconventional. Clara watched Alex, her apprehension growing with each clink of metal. She didn't understand the mechanics, but she understood risk. And something about this makeshift solution felt inherently risky. Perhaps we should call another engineer, she suggested quietly, her voice barely audible above the clatter of Alex's tools. Ava shook her head almost imperceptibly. Too late for that, Ms. van der Linde. He's already started. The worry in Clara's eyes was reflected in her own, though carefully masked. They were both trapped, suspended between hope and a healthy dose of dread, relying on a small-town mechanic and a handful of tractor parts to get them off the ground. Taking flight on a prayer. It'll hold, I promise you, Alex said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. He looked at the gleaming jet, then back at the woman who stood beside it, her face a mask of polite apprehension. He didn't know her name, only that she was waiting for this jet to fly. That fuel line's stronger than it was before. Good as new, maybe even better. He grinned, hoping his confidence was contagious. Inside, his stomach churned with nervous energy. He'd never worked on anything this expensive, or this important. Clara van der Linde gave a small, hesitant smile. I appreciate your dedication, Mr. Tanner, is it? Alex. Just Alex. He shuffled his feet, suddenly aware of the smudge of grease he'd likely just transferred to his jeans. He hadn't exactly dressed for a billionaire's daughter's inspection. The ground crew started the pre-flight checks, the whine of turbines slowly building into a deafening roar. Clara turned towards the boarding stairs, her expression unreadable. Alex watched her ascend, the wind whipping her hair around her face. He felt a strange mix of pride and terror. Pride that he'd been entrusted with this, terror that his small-town fix was all that stood between her and disaster. With a final wave from the cockpit, the stairs were retracted. The jet taxied towards the runway, the ground vibrating beneath Alex's boots. He stood there, the rag clenched tight in his hand as the engine screamed and the jet hurtled down the tarmac. Faster, faster, then finally, gracefully, it lifted into the air. He shielded his eyes, watching it climb until it was just a silver speck against the vast blue canvas. A wave of relief washed over him, so potent it almost knocked him off his feet. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Inside the jet, Clara watched the landscape shrink below. The familiar knot of anxiety was present, a constant companion on these flights, but today it was tempered with something else. She glanced out the window, tracing the line of the runway back to the tiny figure standing beside the hangar. Alex Tanner. She imagined him there, watching, hoping. There was a certain earnestness in his eyes, a genuine desire to help that she found surprisingly comforting. He looked so out of place, so endearingly overwhelmed, yet he'd tackled the problem with a grit she rarely encountered in the polished circles she usually inhabited. She made a mental note, send him a proper thank you. And maybe, just maybe, a small bonus. The man deserved it. This flight, in a way, was taking flight on a prayer whispered by a small-town mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart full of honest effort. Engine trouble. The steady thrum of the jet had transformed into a peculiar comfort, a monotonous song that, strangely, put Clara at ease. She peered out at the infinite azure stretching beneath them, a surprising tranquility washing over her. Ava, seated beside her, meticulously organized the contents of Clara's travel case, each movement precise and efficient. "Everything all right, Miss van der Linde?" she inquired, her eyes briefly lifting. "More than all right, Ava," Clara responded, a faint smile gracing her lips. "I think I'm actually enjoying this." She couldn't quite articulate it, but the vulnerability of being suspended so high above the world, combined with Alex's steady, almost commonplace demeanor, had somehow centered her. Without warning, a hiccup rippled through the aircraft. Not a severe jolt, but a subtle vibration that resonated deep within Clara. The engine's hum faltered, replaced by a fitful cough. "What was that?" Clara asked, her newfound peace shattered. Ava, ever vigilant, was already rising, her gaze fixed on the cockpit. The sputtering intensified, devolving into a series of erratic bursts. The plane dipped, a nauseating sway that churned Clara's stomach. "Alex!" Clara called out, her voice tight with apprehension. The cockpit door flew open, and Alex appeared, his face ashen, a film of perspiration coating his brow. "We have a situation," he announced, his voice strained with controlled urgency. "Engine malfunction." Instantly, Ava was at Clara's side, her hand a reassuring presence on her arm. "What sort of malfunction?" she demanded, her tone clipped. "One of the engines is failing. I'm attempting to compensate, but—" His voice trailed off, his fingers raking through his already tousled hair. His gaze met Clara's, an unspoken apology mirrored in his eyes. This was his burden, his hasty repair. A collective intake of breath swept through the cabin. A flight attendant began to weep silently. A businessman in the forward row launched into a frantic phone call, his words a garbled mix of market jargon and desperate pleas. The carefully curated veneer of opulence and composure crumbled, revealing raw, naked fear. The aircraft pitched again, more violently this time. Overhead bins sprung open, their contents tumbling into the aisle. A child's piercing shriek cut through the air. "Everyone, remain calm," Alex yelled, his voice laced with tension but still commanding. "We're experiencing some turbulence. Please secure your seatbelts." But his words were lost in the pandemonium. Panic had seized control. Clara squeezed Ava's hand, her grip vice-like. The comforting drone of the engines had become a ragged, uneven wheeze, a death knell echoing through the fuselage. She closed her eyes, recalling the weight of her wedding gown, the crushing expectations of her family, and the liberating thrill of her escape. Was this to be her ending? Not a triumphant flight to freedom, but a fiery demise in the desolate unknown. Clara's secret knowledge. The shuddering hadn't stopped, but it had become almost rhythmic, like a malevolent metronome counting down to disaster. Clara, strangely, felt a flicker of something akin to calm. Panic, she realized, was a luxury they couldn't afford. Alex, knuckles white on the controls, was muttering into the comms. Words like fuel pressure, fluctuating, and bypass valve drifted back, each one a tiny ice shard in the already frigid cabin air. Alex, Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. He glanced at her, his face etched with worry. She pushed past her earlier timidity, drawing on a well of knowledge she'd long kept hidden. It's the auxiliary fuel pump regulator, isn't it? Specifically, the feedback loop dampener. It's oscillating. Alex stared, disbelief warring with something that looked suspiciously like hope. How did you know that? I minored in aerospace engineering, she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Before I was supposed to be a socialite. Okay, Alex said, snapping back to focus. Oscillating, right? So, the fuel pressure is spiking intermittently, causing the engine to surge. I managed to reroute through the manual feed, but it's not a long-term solution. No, Clara agreed. It'll overstress the primary pump. You need to manage the load. Tell me the current RPM. Alex rattled off a number. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the engine schematics she hadn't thought about in years. Okay. Increase the throttle incrementally, but monitor the EGT, exhaust gas temperature. Keep it below 650 degrees Celsius. If it spikes, back off immediately. We need to feather the throttle to smooth out the fuel delivery until we can find a stable point. Alex followed her instructions, his hands moving with practiced precision. The shuddering lessened, becoming a low thrum. The jet still vibrated, but the violent jerks had subsided. EGT holding steady at 640, he reported, his voice tight. RPM stable. We're losing altitude slowly, but it's manageable. Good, Clara said, relief flooding through her, a warm wave against the cold fear. Keep it there. We need to find a landing strip. Any small airports nearby? Alex checked his instruments. There's a private airfield about 70 nautical miles southwest. Unlit, but it's our best shot. 70 miles. It felt like a lifetime. Clara leaned back in her seat, watching Alex fight to keep the crippled jet aloft. The rhythmic thrum of the engine, once terrifying, now felt almost comforting. It was a fragile rhythm, a precarious balance, but it was a rhythm nonetheless. And for now, it was keeping them alive. She looked at Alex, his brow furrowed in concentration, his eyes fixed on the horizon. A wave of gratitude washed over her, stronger than anything she'd felt before. She might have been a billionaire's daughter, but in this moment he was the one in control. He was the one keeping them from falling out of the sky. And somehow that was exactly where she needed to be. A bride's gratitude. The landing was smoother than Alex dared hope. He held his breath until the wheels kissed the tarmac, a sigh escaping his lips that tasted of oil and burnt rubber. Through the small, grime-streaked window of the hangar, he watched the sleek jet taxi towards a cluster of waiting vehicles. He saw a woman, the one he'd helped emerge. She moved with a determined grace, her dress, now slightly rumpled, hinting at the elegance within. Relief washed over him, a wave so strong it almost knocked him off his feet. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning up, the rhythmic clang of his tools a comforting counterpoint to the whirlwind of emotions still swirling inside him. Pride warred with the lingering terror of the potential disaster he'd averted. The next morning, a courier van pulled up outside his modest workshop. Alex, wiping grease from his hands, signed for a large, padded envelope. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a check. The sum printed on it was staggering. More money than he'd ever dreamed of seeing. Enough to buy the shop, buy a house, maybe even take a vacation somewhere that didn't involve engine fumes. Beneath the check was a small, handwritten note, penned in elegant script. Mr. Tanner, words cannot express my gratitude. You saved more than just a flight, you saved a wedding. Thank you. I hope this small token reflects the magnitude of my appreciation. Clara van der Linde. Alex frowned. Van der Linde. The name tugged at the edge of his memory. He pulled out his phone and typed the name into the search engine. Images flooded the screen. Clara van der Linde, heiress to the van der Linde fortune. Splashed across magazine covers, society pages, and gossip blogs. The wedding of the century, the headlines screamed. A fairy tale romance between a billionaire's daughter and a European prince. He stared at the photographs at the radiant woman in the designer gown. It was her. The same woman who had looked at him with such quiet desperation, the same woman who had trusted him with her life. The sheer scale of her world, the unimaginable wealth and privilege, crashed down on him. He, Alex Tanner, a grease-stained mechanic from a forgotten corner of the world, had played a part in it. He looked at the check again, the zeros blurring slightly. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was life-changing. It was about the trust she had placed in him, the quiet strength he had seen beneath the layers of wealth and expectation. He had saved a billionaire bride, and in doing so, he had inadvertently changed his own life forever. The aroma of gasoline and oil, which usually comforted him, suddenly seemed to hint at a much wider horizon, a future buzzing with possibilities he had never dared to consider.